people have bad habits. If you, as a manager of a team, want to try and bring this thinking into your team, you've got to overcome a whole history, a whole lifetime worth of bad habits. So, that's the problem. What do we do about it? Well, one of the things we've got to do about it is we've got to step back a little bit from just sort of our everyday job, if you like, and just step back from the coalface of what we do every day. I mean, most of us go about our business kind of just getting on, doing our jobs. If you've been doing it for a while, you can do it maybe even in your sleep. And you go about, you enjoy what you do, you go, but we don't necessarily take time out to step back and look at what's going on around us, to look to see if there are any issues that might be coming down the way that might change the world for us. Sometimes we do spot it, and it might almost be too late because you've got to wake everybody else up in the business, and you've got to try and get the motor going to get moving, and well, now obviously part of what I'm trying to do in this presentation today is to make sure that we don't have to bail out in a few years. That we don't have to stop doing what we are doing as a company because we've run out of resources or we didn't act ethically and somebody comes and shuts us down. So here's a very simple four-step model. Very high level, but it's just to get you thinking about it. If you want more information, I'll give you my website address and you can go and download a copy of the presentation, and you can also get a lot more information about some of the detail behind what I'm about to go through. But in this lunchtime session, just a highlights package. There are four things I think that have to be done in order to begin the process of thinking and acting in an ethical way. Our focus is on saving energy, so let's have a look at that. If we want to save energy, we will, by saving energy, save money and ultimately secure our future. Step one to do that would be to measure what it is we're currently doing. So in the example of energy usage, we need to measure how much energy are we using. Now, of course, somebody in this building knows how much energy is being used. There is somebody who at least pays the bill every month. I assume so, otherwise we wouldn't have lights. And there is somebody who manages it by looking at it. But how many of you know how much energy is consumed? I mean, do you know how much energy is being consumed by the lights that are currently warming me up quite nicely? Do we know how much energy is consumed by just the lunch that we might be eating or by the cars that we're driving? We know that it is consuming energy, but how much? And step one is to measure. What you don't measure, you can't improve, or to put it positively, the only way to manage something is to measure it. If you're not measuring it, there's no ways you can manage it and improve it. And so step one is to measure. So if we're talking about electricity, what you want to do is go in and measure your electricity usage. Now, the simplest version of that is that somebody goes down to the electricity meter every day and measures how much electricity we used and writes it up on the staff notice board. And then you start to get a trend emerging and you start to see we used less electricity today than we did yesterday. How can we reduce it? If we switch off all the lights when we go home, you suddenly see that that makes a huge difference. And that's the simplest method, but there are some very clever systems that can do this, called automated measuring and targeting systems. Basically, it's very simple. You put a little, very cheap electronic gizmo onto the electricity meter, and every half an hour it automatically pulses. It takes a measurement of that electricity and then sends that meter reading to a computer somewhere. And that then can track a trend. The best system I've ever seen that does all of this, it's real time, looks at all the different data, it can look at every meter and consolidate it. There's a system I saw in London called the Eco Driver. And this is a picture of one of the screens that they did. They took those pulsed meters, they basically put them onto a server, and then they created a nice graphic front end. So the people like you and I, who are not engineers or electrical engineers or maybe even excited about electrical meters and so on, we can just look at a screen and say, wow, look how much electricity we're using. There's a weekly view, and then there's a daily view with a target line. This particular company, having put in this metering system, discovered that their aircon and heating system was very inefficient. That purple bit there is the overnight. And they basically were leaving the system on heating and cooling an empty building. So all they did was they went and bought a very cheap timer, put it onto the system and made sure it switched off and switched on appropriately. They saved in one building £6,000 in the next month on electricity. Now you do £6,000 saving every month for a year, and then you say that this building was a set of managed offices that had 30 offices. Now you're talking money. Now you're talking something where you can take that money and use it for other purposes. So very simply, you need to measure. Now you can do this in your own house. If you're a parent in the house, you don't necessarily want to pay for an automated system with a little computer screen on the fridge. That system is available, but it's probably a little bit overkill for a residential house. But why don't you just measure the electricity every evening? Put it up on the fridge, family notice board, or get, as we do in our house, get your 8-year-old to do it for you. Lots of fun, and then we work out what can we do to reduce electricity usage. That's really the next step, is that by measuring and communicating, you then can empower people to change their behavior. That empowerment is a key word because we work in buildings that weren't set up for this type of thinking. One of the obvious things is, why do we have to have all the lights switched on in every room all the time? Because most lights in most buildings are centrally controlled. So one of the big things that people have started to do is to put motion sensors in the toilets, for instance, so that when you walk in it's dark, and as you walk in it senses you coming in and switches them on and off. That doesn't work for everybody. I know some people spend a little bit longer on the throne than others do, and after a few minutes suddenly pitch dark. That could be pretty scary in the middle of a day. And you sort of have to jump up and wave your hands, I'm still here. It could be, anyway. But the point is about empowerment, about making sure that people understand that it is required of them to change their behavior, that we incentivize them. I like to think of it very simply as the ABCs of change. If there's a behavior that you want changed, what are the antecedents? What are the things that are going to incentivize, encourage, motivate that behavior? And then you get the behavior. And then what are you going to do as a consequence? Are you going to reward people? Are you going to just thank them? Or are you going to actually, is there some discipline involved if the behavior doesn't happen? So just think about that. What do you have to do to get people to behave correctly? And what can you do after you see that behavior happening? A simple ABC.